Conservative after conservative get up and talk about a substantial connection. Yeah. You know, a lot of provinces have substantial connection rules too. For example, the province of Alberta says you can't run as an MLA unless you've had a substantial connection of at least 6 months. I'm curious if the member believes that Pierre Poilievre should have a substantial connection to Alberta before he runs as a member of Parliament in that province.
Clearly, maybe the member hasn't read the bill, but I assure you that he will seek the support of and the trust of the people of Battle River Crowfoot in a place that he grew up in a place that he was born in a place that he was raised in, and I look forward to him bashing down that member when he's back in September.
Request for emergency debate. The honourable member for Thornhill.
It now seems that the Liberal government failed to get a deal on tariffs. In fact, we learned during the last campaign that they quietly reduced the retaliatory tariffs to near zero. And we find out yesterday Donald Trump has increased the unjustified tariffs to 50% on steel and aluminum. Now, of course, this is after somebody who's elected in this country who claimed that he was a man with a plan, that he was the guy that you hired in a crisis, and what we see now is a 50% increase on tariffs. So for steel workers who quote say that they are on the verge of collapse, for families who are worried about putting food on the table or keeping a roof over their head, for businesses that need certainty, Liberal ministers need to answer to this House. I know that it's not something that they care to do. I know that they want to go home early for their summer vacation. We've seen that when they've ignored calls from this House to present a budget. But I think this is important and requires an emergency debate. And therefore, I am requesting one on behalf of Canadians and on behalf of members on this side of the House.
Here.
Oh, yeah. Thornhill for her intervention. However, I am not satisfied that this request meets the requirements of the standing orders at this time.
So awkward. I don't know why the finance minister takes all of this abuse from the prime minister. She told Canadians that the deficit wouldn't go past $40 billion. That was her own self-imposed guardrail. Now she says everything's fine as her political career collapses, and so does her credibility, all because of this prime minister. 5 senior Liberal veterans and 3 political staffers confirmed to the Globe that the tensions have risen between her office and the PMO over spending. These are the same people who last summer said that she couldn't communicate. We know what the Prime Minister thinks of her, but why does she still have confidence in him?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are united. And on this side of the House, we recognize what a privilege it is every single day to work hard for Canada and Canadians and to defend the national interest. That is what we are focused on every single day. And I would urge the MPs opposite to remember, this is a challenging time in Canada and the world. It is not a time for cheap partisan games.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada is imposing tariffs that cause maximum impact on the United States, minimum impact on Canada. Fact, on over $60 billion of U.S. exports to Canada. Fact, raised over $1.7 billion already. Fact.
Oh, yeah.
So MPs last night passed an amendment to the Speech from the Throne to essentially try and force the government to introduce a fall economic statement or a budget before you guys rise in the House. It was really their first defeat. You know, some of us were caught off guard that they went down on this one.
Oh, yeah.
But Stephen McKinnon, the government House leader, is not really taking this all that seriously, saying today that it was just a non-binding advisory resolution. What do you say to him?
Well, look, I think this is the first indication that you'll see a government that's a lot like the last one in terms of ignoring the will of Parliament. So you have the majority of MPs passing this motion to demand that the government tables a budget, and now you have a government sort of flat out ignoring that. And I think that Canadians deserve that. We haven't had a proper accounting of the books in more than a year. It's a convention to obviously put up a budget in, and frankly, Mark Carney is the guy who said that he had a plan, and instead tabled $500 billion of estimates, which is 8% higher than the 2% cap that he talked about earlier and before tabling that. And I think Canadians deserve to know where that money's spent, how it's spent, and where the government's at.
If it's such a concern, though, why was the language kind of weak, frankly, in the amendment? It was saying, MPs are urging the government to introduce a budget. Why not demand, require, we need to see one?
Parliament's not... Oh, yeah. See a government that's a lot like the last one in terms of ignoring the will of Parliament. So you have the majority of MPs passing this motion to demand that the government tables a budget, and now you have a government sort of flat out ignoring that. And I think that Canadians deserve that. We haven't had a proper accounting of the books in more than a year. It's a convention to obviously put up a budget in, and frankly, Mark Carney is the guy who said that he had a plan, and instead tabled $500 billion of estimates, which is 8% higher than the 2% cap that he talked about earlier and before tabling that. And I think Canadians deserve to know where that money's spent, how it's spent, and where the government's at.
MPs are urging the government to introduce a budget. Why not demand, require, we need to see one?
Parliament's not shade of grey. It's introduce a budget or not. Vote yes or no. There's no gray area in this. So MPs, the majority of which have said to the government, hey, table a budget. They voted for it. Canadians are demanding it by way of Parliament, and I think it's incumbent on this government to respect the will of Parliament, and I think it speaks more to the fact that they can't run a majority government, or they're going to have some problems winning votes, and they can't run this thing as if they have a majority. So I think they got to go back to the drawing board and figure out their parliamentary strategy and what they're going to do, rather than just ignore the will of Parliament.
Oh, yeah.
What do you make of what transpired there between the premiers?
Yeah, look, I think it's more a commentary on the last 10 years and who was at the helm and how bad the meetings could have been. I hadn't been in the room for the meetings with Trudeau, but I think this is Mark Carney falling short of his own expectation setting. Like, he came there, he said, I'm going to provide a list. We're going to have a list of shovel-ready projects or however he said. And there's no list, and there's no details. And again, to provide certainty for investors to come here and actually start building the projects, to start making plans about building the projects, there's lots of things that you can say. It's not only the projects. It's pronouncements on whether you're going to kill Bill C-69 or the tanker ban, the industrial carbon tax. If this guy is about a plan and he's about certainty, yesterday certainly wasn't it. It was a lot of platitudes and a lot of photo ops.
The premiers didn't really feel that way, though. They didn't have a problem with there being no definitive list. He essentially said, I'm going to take back your suggestions, we'll think on it, and then we'll come up with a solution.
Look, I think you'll get...
What?